My name is David Pennell. I'm the Estates Director at Burghley. What does that mean in old-fashioned terms? I'm a land agent. I'm a chartered surveyor by training, and then I've gone and done a few business sort of things in land economy, and then I have progressed through different estates, different property practices to get to where I am now. So I arrived at Burghley about 7 years ago. So I don't know how many of you know Burghley. And if I could just do a quick show of hands as to how many people have heard of Burghley before. There we go. Have you heard of Burghley because of Burghley horse trials? Okay. Have you heard of it because of Burghley House? Perfect. That's much better. No, it's not. So I'm going to run you through quickly what Burghley is, who we are, what we do, and then I'm going to talk to you. It's a rather grand title of Innovation on a Landed Estate, but some ideas that we've got coming, some change that we're trying to instigate to save this great house into the centuries that are ahead of us. And also look after what we've put in place over the previous years. So why do we do it? The first Lord Burghley, William Cecil, pronounced Cecil, not Cecil. So we have his 500th, his quincentenary of his birth in 2020. So a big year for us, 500 years coming up just over the horizon. And there are lots of plans in place for that, some in the formative stages, some a bit further on. So who was he? Well, he was Queen Elizabeth I's go-to man, effectively. He did everything for her, and he consolidated his power base by making sure that Elizabeth was informed on everything. And we have a fascinating book at Burghley, and Hatfield have a sister of that, which actually depicts in Cecil's hand when he and Elizabeth were standing on the white cliffs of Dover, seeing the Spanish Armada coming towards England. And he knew that because of his spies that he'd put in place throughout Europe. So he was a very clever man. He taught himself 5 languages at St John's in Cambridge, a fearsome intellect, and he left his estate in a very strong position when he died. But through that, for the next few hundred years, we put in a bit more money, marriage and wealth. So they married well, a bit like someone else we know who's married well. But what they did was they embarked on a partnership with Chatsworth. They married a lady from one of the daughters from Chatsworth, and her dowry to Lord Burghley was one of the rooms of Chatsworth. So she went into a room, she chose a room, and she had everything within that room as her dowry. I would love to go to Chatsworth and do that now. They also then did other things. So they travelled. They took the money, the land that they had earned, and they built on their portfolios going forwards, and they travelled a lot through Europe. They collected while travelling, but whilst collecting, they also protected themselves. Now, these blunderbusses are actually within the house, and Lord Burghley had his own sort of soldiers on call that he would go to protect himself and his entourage whilst travelling. They're amazing collections, and they sit literally on a windowsill in the house, which I see every Friday as I walk around to a meeting in one of the drawing rooms, and I just think they're lovely, which is why you get a picture of them. They also collected tapestries. He had them specially made for rooms in the house. He measured the house. He knew how big the walls were, and he would send letters back when he saw something he liked to check the measurements with his housekeeper, a lady called Goody Rudkin, who would measure up and send details back. This is one of our best pictures at the moment, and it's just gone on loan. So this he collected in 1768, but actually probably dates from about 1537, the Bassano, and is currently on loan to the Dulwich Gallery till, I think, January, February next year. But it is wonderful that our collections are still going out on loan to other people. It's also it doesn't look huge, but it's probably half the size of this screen again. And you can literally sit there and get lost in it, which for a Neanderthal land agent, chartered surveyor, property man like myself is actually saying something. But we did hit a few bumps in the road, so we had a bit of a gambling problem. We lost the London estate, so all this stuff we're sitting in around here, Tavistock Square, Russell Square, once owned by Burghley, lost to Woburn in a gambling game. Not great, I would add. We would like that back. No chance. They also had a few racehorses. They also had a boat, the Queen of Palmyra, which he was very extravagantly in love with. I think he rather neglected his wife, but rather put it on his boat. But there we go. So where are we now? So all of that snapshot, I've just gone through 300 and something odd years in about 3 minutes to get to where we are today. So they consolidated the estate. They collected those priceless collections within the house. He engaged Capability Brown in 1760, spent 25 years on that parkland. Brown added a lot of the chimneys and things you see on here. He also added these courtyard of buildings and landscaped the wider park put in the river, and the Lion Bridge up the top. We'll see a few other slides as we go through. So what are we today? Well, we have extensive land holdings. They spread about 12 miles from the core of the estate, and you can see the listed parkland and the size of it in the middle. And throughout this estate, I'll come back to this later, throughout this estate we have significant property holdings and nearly 700 tenants. So Burghley House is magnificent. We've got quite considerable amounts of staterooms, the roof, the park surrounding it, and it doesn't really matter what light you look at it in, it's always slightly different. Hewed from a Lincolnshire limestone, and a lot of it actually built by or designed by Lord Burghley himself. So the house is famous for quite a few things, but the heaven room, this picture in the middle, is possibly one of the best. And you go around the house and you go around something called the George rooms, and you finish in the heaven room on today's tour. But a couple of hundred years ago, you would have started the other way around, and you would have come through the hell staircase, intimidated you, you'd have come into heaven, put you at your ease, and the more powerful you were, the further through the rooms you got. A bit like Versailles, you were made to walk along a very long corridor to intimidate you till you got to the meeting room at the end, which was actually quite small, and if you got there, then you were powerful. So Verrio, who painted this, also did all the George rooms in the house, and then we have lots of other things going on. The great kitchen. You then move from the house, surrounded by its parkland within a sculpture park. We've got a 400-head fallow herd. We've got gardens open to the public that have about 50,000 visitors. The house has about 100,000 visitors a year. And then the park also, we don't charge for entry into what we call the low park. It's free to the public to come in, so we don't actually count the visitors. But if you amassed all the number of visitors across the estate throughout the year, through all our events, we're probably peaking at around 700 to 750,000 people that visit Burghley in a year. We also have an education department. Last year, 6,000 children came through our education department, and we have 2 full-time staff in that. It's one of our charitable objectives. Education of people about history, about conservation, about Burghley, about the historic setting, and we consider it to be a key objective going forwards. Heritage. We also do a lot of work on heritage, not only on Burghley House and its collection of buildings, but a huge amount of other things going forwards. About a year ago, we had to paint the Great Hall that hadn't been painted for quite a considerable amount of time, and all of the scaffolding for this Great Hall had to come in a window half the size of that whiteboard over there, because the scaffolding poles were too long to bend around corridors. And you can see here that actually this ceiling here is lined with leather on the ceiling. We think as insulation, but we didn't know that until we got up there on this huge scaffolding platform. And then sadly, we had to take it all down and take it all out the same window. But it looks amazing, and we put some tapestries up. We rehung some paintings from the collections in different places and worked them in different orders. So what funds all of that? The property portfolio is what keeps Burghley going. It has significant land holdings, significant property assets, and that ranges from houses. These are almshouses on the top left, to big townhouses. Middlemarch was filmed in this square, for example. We've got some commercial properties dotted through town. A lot of sales have taken place in the last 100 years, but there is a substantial property portfolio in place that covers quite significant farm holdings. So the bedrock is land, and from that we can do lots of other things, but we've got over 20 main agricultural tenants. We've got 7 pubs, 3 hotels. We don't operate them all in-house. That would finish me off. But we do operate a couple in-house, a couple of pubs and a hotel. And then we also have the mandatory shops, cafes and things that we like to push the general public through when they're leaving the house. And hopefully you'll buy a coffee and do some secondary spend in our shops. And that has again changed and evolved over time and continues to change and evolve pretty much on an annual basis in what the public demands, what visitors expect, quality, standards, and change. We also do lots of events, which range from a film festival started after 2012, actually. After the Olympics, we did a Great Olympic Garden Party. It was very popular. We showed a couple of films that year, and so now we do it every year, and it's very popular. We also have the mandatory battle proms. We have a couple of concerts, and I believe the house team are trying to get Tom Jones for next year. So lots going on. As an employer, at the moment we've got over about 110 staff, and they're in lots of different departments across the board. And this is just a selection of them. But on cross-country day of horse trials, that swells to over 1,000 people employed by the estate in the local economy. So, continuing the norm, should Burghley continue as a large landed estate aiming at this demographic? Because if we do, what happens to us in 20 years' time? We all know the ageing population is living longer, but is this our core market? Is this who we should be targeting? Should we continue to look at them? A while ago I talked to the National Trust, and they have some great initiatives going forwards on how they attract new people, families, the younger generation, the younger demographics, different types of people coming from all over the place, people who travel, people who like to stay nearby. So should we continue that norm, or should we look to branch out and attract a wider demographic to increase traffic to Burghley? That's not to say that we should ignore this demographic, because they are a very valuable leisure pound to us. So, you're going to think, why on earth has someone who's talking about a country estate with a large listed house put an oil tanker on the screen? It's not the modern Queen of Palmyra. We haven't bought a boat. We're not going down that route. But I do liken a large landed estate to a shipping tanker. It takes a long time to turn a ship, and you have to lay lots of threads to turn that tanker. The problem with a shipping tanker is a bit like a large landed estate, that once you've got that change going and you're beginning to crest the wave, get out the way. Or get on board, because change is rapid when it gets going. It's taken me 7 years to effect it, but this year has been the busiest year I've ever had at Burghley going forwards, which I think says something about what we're doing and what we hope to deliver. So what are we doing, and how do we hope to deliver it? Well, we looked at the estate and we've worked out what different things we could do all over the place. And a few years ago we identified 61 different sets of farm buildings that could be done. We've got nearly 17,000 acres of land and access to that. We've got rivers, we've got quarries, we've got forests, we've got farms, we've got the general public, we've got visitors, we've got a house. We've got Stamford, a wonderful stone town, often voted one of the best places in the UK to live. So how do we maximise the advantage from all of that and encourage people to come to Burghley and enjoy it in the future? I'm going to take a couple of those key projects that I've just highlighted. And this is what we began to do. We began to look at what our priorities were going forwards. How should you take a large landed estate forward? What is important? And I haven't put these in order because ultimately we could have a conversation at the end of this as to what you consider your priorities of those and what we consider priorities. I would imagine that we will all have different priorities for different things, as I do across the estate. And so each of those, and I also started with a much busier slide, and I had to cut it down quite considerably to all of that. So I've taken a couple of those, and I've just focused on them as case studies. So the Stanford Football Club site was sitting there, languishing. This are the buildings, some stands dating from the early 1900s, very poor state of condition and repair, but just over 3 acres of land within Stamford. Burghley House, for example, is right over here. This is the main high street coming into town and surrounded by estate land, and this is the station here. This is a school down here, and there's another A43 road comes in here. The majority of all of this block in here is estate property. Now, over 3 acres of land, potential development value, but before we could move, before we could build, we had to move the football club. So we worked with the Football Association, the Football Foundation, Sport England, the Charity Commissioners, the Skills Funding Agency, a local sixth form education centre with over 2,000 students, and also the football club, who had been our tenants for over 125 years. And we built this stadium on the north side of Stamford. It cost just under £6 million, and £3 million of that was grant funded through different schemes across the board. And the site, it doesn't show the scale of it, but the site is now actually shared between New College Stamford and the Football Association, with classrooms, a big sports hall on the end, bars, changing rooms, and at the end over here there is also a 4G pitch which the football club used, but is also rented out to the community, which is now actually got about 5% of its available hours left. And those are generally between about 11 and 1 during the day. So a huge bonus to the town, a real coup for the estate to deliver it. within our farmland on the borders of Stamford, and it enabled us to then look at something else that we are very keen on, which is placemaking. So on the football club site, we've built 48 houses. But of those 48 houses, we didn't just want to chuck up any old house, we wanted to do them properly. We looked, do you remember that slide I talked about, all the historic entrance to Stamford? We wanted them to look and feel part of Stamford. So it was about master planning, looking at the angles, the vistas, the views, the roads. It was about the longevity of design. I wouldn't want to say anything about Persimmon's building quality. I wouldn't want to say anything about the big house builders' length of time, but our houses will last much longer. But they are taking much longer to build in order to do that, and they're more expensive to build. And we're very lucky that in this part of Stamford, we're getting the sale value to protect that enhancement that we're allowed to do. Elsewhere, we're looking at some other affordable housing, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So it was all of those things that were important to us. So we began on Cecil Square, 48 houses. We looked at windows, chimneys, doors, sills. We even looked at street furniture. So when I say street furniture, the pavements, the lights, even the doorbells, how it all worked together, how it worked as a community, how it reflected what was the best things that you could see in Stamford already. And then we started to deliver it. And we found some key partners for that. And this was the show home, which obviously show homes are show homes, and they're all up to them. But they are selling well. So 48 homes, over 1,000 people on the waiting list for these homes, and people queued overnight for 3 days to buy the first 10 houses. Mind-blowing. And we also kept 10 of the ones that we built. So there you go. So the whole point of placemaking is that when you're coming across this road here, you have a vista to an anchor here. And we'll come later to some other ideas that we've got. But it's also about, if you're walking around this site, what you see. So if you're walking around this corner here, you get this anchor house here. So you get that full view there of beautiful stone, ashlar, rubble, chimneys, but also you get it from here. This elevation here reflects another part of Stamford. But why have we kept 10 houses? Well, because I have a lot of listed buildings that are pretty expensive to maintain and repair. EPCs, energy performance certificates, I have no idea what the government will do with them, but I imagine ultimately they'll get rid of the listed building protection. So from a lettings perspective, where we make our rental income, it's going to be becoming increasingly difficult to make them energy ready. So that's why we keep new. We also then realised that actually on that site there was an element of affordable housing, so 20 affordable homes that we were keen to build as well, that we were keen to retain. So we have retained them, and we have worked with our local authority, we've worked with the Homes and Communities Agency. Rather than establish our own registered provider, we were very worried about the right to buy, which I'm relieved about because the government in the last budget announced a trial of the right to buy for housing associations, and we might ultimately have lost these had we done it. So we contracted privately in perpetuity with the local authority to provide these for affordable rents. And the first tenants moved in last week. So 20 affordable homes provided by the estate, kept in our rental portfolio at about 70% of open market value. Really good news story for us. It's what we used to do. I highlighted the almshouses at the beginning. We should be doing more of it. They're a good investment for us. They're a totally different build quality, but then they're further away from the stone part of Stamford and in much more of a Victorian area. So you can also see the attention to detail. So all of the gas meters, electricity meters are all on the side of the buildings, not on the front. If you go through large developments these days, they're just plastered on the front. We are trying to create a market, a village green sort of feel to this, and we wanted that detail even on this level of housing. So we were delighted the way they have come out. So we've added units to our portfolio, so 34 new units into our portfolio this year. So the retention of units is important to us because it gives us control near the park, near our other houses. It gives us new income streams, which are also important because with over 100 staff, when we put up salaries every year by a small percentage, it costs us quite a lot of money. So we need to keep paying for that going forwards. Building things are not getting cheaper. So it also works for us, Burghley, to bring it all together under one umbrella, but also show that we're doing what we say we're doing on the tin. So we are trying to work with Stamford and deliver some things for them. And actually affordable homes was a key strategy for the local authority and the local council. It's also done a really useful thing of pump priming the next stage. So we've released capital monies from the sale of those 48 homes, although we kept 10, so we kept a lessened capital receipt, but we've got some back through, and so we're using that to do the next stage. One of which was this. So the dairy was built as a ferme ornée, so in the 1800s, by the Marquis. So I talked about boats earlier, I talked about obsessions. He was also obsessed with his cows, his dairy cows, so he built an ornate farm. So each of these entrances here that you can see on this building was for his cows, for his jerseys to go in. And there were stone floors, there were cast iron mangers, hay racks. They were all imprinted with the Burghley logo. There was a dairy built over here in a thatched building. There was a new farm manager's house, a new farm workers' cottage, which we still rent out. So we decided what to do with this. We looked at the options. Should it be a spa? I quite like the idea of a cowpat face pack, which I cannot say quickly. But we looked at a new golf clubhouse because that's also near here. So what should we do with it? Well, ultimately we felt that with what we were offering, a holiday house would actually be really useful. And actually also encourage people to come and stay at Burghley, to partake in what we do. You can also see the importance of this in location, given that this is our horse trials course. So right next to it, 100,000 people streaming past this on the Saturday of event with a holiday house that sleeps 20 people. Not that there's any marketing involved in any way, shape or form. So here you can see some of the original listed features. We used it as a store of Collie Western slate, which is a local stone used for roofing materials. It's throughout the country. One of our assets long term is 200 acres of Collie Western stone slate that we've got underground. You mine it, you don't quarry it. It's quite an interesting business model, which I won't go into here. Please note this, the drinker. So very classical. He had all his drinkers made like shells, classical architecture, classical painting. So he thought, oh, I'll have my cows drink out of shells. I dread to think what it cost. But what we tried to do was then keep a lot of that important stuff. So it's very listed. So we have kept a lot of the ironwork. We've reused a lot of the ironwork going forwards. And it was a £1.7 million restoration project pulled together by some in-house teams and some out-house teams. And there you can see the dairy completed with all those things. You can also see Burghley House in the background. You can see its key location to the heritage, the core heritage asset, and the horse trials course just here. You can see here how we've kept the things involved. This is all wood made from the stalls, used in the bathrooms, and lots of other stuff going on. So, I know I'm rattling through, but I'm very aware of time, May. So, the walled kitchen garden was completed in Burghley, at Burghley in 1705 and is over a mile from the house and is over 13 acres in size. And when you add in this field down here, which is an orchard as well, you get to about 18 acres in size. So, in the Great War, all our gardeners disappeared, obviously, to fight, and very few came back. Whereas this garden, from the 1700s on, through the 1700s and 1800s, would have fed Stanford quite considerably on fruit and vegetables. There were 12 glass houses in the end here at one stage, melon houses, pineapple houses. This apple loft holds mushroom houses downstairs, and the great vegetable garden in the middle would have probably seen about 18 gardeners full-time on it at one stage, not only supplying Burghley House right over here, but also the local populace. So it rather fell into rack and ruin over the years. The modern agriculture that was tried in there rather decimated some lovely arches where they just drove the tractor through because that was easier. So we began in conjunction with Natural England and something called the HLS scheme, the higher level scheme, a full-blown restoration project of £1.6 million on the wall garden and the apple loft, which is this beautiful building here. And you can see that this was bricked up at one stage to try and help it survive. So we've taken that all out, found the mushroom houses underneath, down here. We did put breeze blocks back in because we weren't quite ready to restore this building, but these can easily come out in the future. And we began a full-blown restoration of this. Over 200,000 bricks were either taken out, repointed. It took 9 goes for the stonemasons and brickies to get the lime mortar right. I think by go 7 they'd had enough of me. But we got there in the end, and now I'm so pleased that we took the time to do it. It looks amazing, and it's dried. It's coming through really well. But you can see the importance of that on these huge swathes of wall that are going in there. Why have we done it? It was probably coming close to going on the at-risk register. It needed doing. We had a responsibility to look after it. But also as an event space, as a space of use for some function or sort of another, we think there's real opportunity there. It's a lovely, tranquil, peaceful place in a private part of the estate that I think could be used in so many different ways. And we're very keen to see that start coming to fruition. We've also kept a lot of the fruit trees in here. This is a Banach Beauty, over 200 years old. And we've also put in a fruit walk here with loads of apples and pears on. So this is it here after near complete restoration going forwards. So all of that is lovely, and those projects are wonderful for us to do, but we also have to find ways of funding them. And so we're also very rich, very lucky with a very rich vein of limestone through the estate. And this is a 170-acre quarry that is literally opening up now. It's been nearly 15 years in the planning. So we first got planning permission in July 2012, okay, and it is now opening up in the last 2 months. So that shows you the time of delivery it involved. The estate also, about 20 years ago, along this boundary of this road, to protect its villages in Wakeley and Barradon over here, planted new strips of woodland about 25 years ago. So interestingly, that was my predecessor that did that, and I am now looking 40, 50 years ahead at our next quarry operation and planting woodland now, so that we are protecting our villages, protecting the landscape, and working with the locals. This went through planning with no objections because we worked with the locals. Why did it go through? Partly because I built a 2-mile haul road, which has cost nearly £1 million. But it has avoided our villages. And we own a huge amount of property in Barradon and Wakeley. They're very important to us. They're surrounded by our farmland. And there is 16 million tonnes of limestone to come out of there. 16 million tonnes of limestone comes out. It's quite a big hole, so there's an opportunity to put stuff back in, which we're working on now. And then it will be restored to agricultural use. And a lot has been learnt over the time, so on restoration of land after quarries. Interestingly, I have another quarry from about 50 years ago, which is about 30 acres in size, that is absolutely dreadful in its agricultural restoration, but could be used for new income streams for energy, waste, composting, and lots of things like that because the access is good. So how does that work going forwards? Well, a lot of that limestone, it's not building stone, it's brashy limestone, so it will be used for foundations. A lot of it's going towards the A14 road improvement at the moment around Huntingdon. But in the last couple of years, the government, well, I'm sure you all know this, but the last couple of years, the government has changed housing numbers in this country substantially. The impact on Stamford has meant that over the next 20 years, there needs to be 2,500 houses built within our geographical location. Now that is a huge amount of houses. That's a third of Stamford again. So 17,000 houses have been allocated to our council's district area, of which Stamford gets 2,500. Now the estate is working with 2 other landowners to bring forward that development in conjunction with the local authorities, because we believe that we're both capable of delivering it, but also we want to deliver it in the right way. And we are the first to admit that actually in the past 50 years we have sold land and not really cared about what was built on it. But that needs to change, has to change. We want to build something better. We're very concerned to protect Stamford and its history going forwards. So how do we do that? Well, we formed a huge team of consultants to look at this, but we've gone quite considerably back in time to look at it. And if you look at Stamford through the ages, and obviously I could have gone back a lot further, but I thought this was probably far enough, and 4 slides work quite well, that Stamford here, Burghley House is in the bottom sort of right, effectively, all the time. Okay, you can see that development has headed away because of Burghley's land ownership. It's headed away from the listed park and the heritage asset. So, and the land that we're talking about is also over here, up here. Okay, So you can see how it's begin to push there. And we've then begun to look at the best things of Stamford. And I mentioned earlier anchor points. So Stamford is all about its views and its vistas, its narrow streets, its wide streets, the buildings that hold it. Church spires are very good, big buildings, Georgian sort of architectural features. And it's taking the best of those and trying to create them in a modern setting, not necessarily out of stone, because if you go back to this, a lot of this area here is the historic core. But as it's gone through, it's been built in different materials. And actually this lot here is quite Victorian and brick orientated. If you slap 2,000 stone houses on there, it would be completely and utterly wrong. But if you can blend it somehow together and create some beautiful houses built out of lots of different materials and blended into what we hope will effectively become a new conservation area in 50 to 100 years' time, then we can all be proud of that. But it's also about delivering the right sort of homes. The socio-economic growth that needs to take place within developments, such as our squares, have got big houses, but they've also got smaller houses where, you know, the staff effectively used to live. And now we all live in different size houses, but we all work different hours, different things, and we all want different things. So you need to build houses for that. And if you ask me to reflect on the houses that we've built, of the affordable homes we built, they were all 2, 3 and 4 bedrooms. I would have built some flats, because some of our tenants feel that as pensioners they want to stay within Stamford, but they don't want to sleep on the ground floor, but they do want to be in one level, and they hate stairs. So that's what we should have done, and that's what we'll aim to do going forwards. We're also very keen to ensure that we avoid becoming a dormitory town. So we don't want to just build houses. We want to build offices, shops and communities. So we've begun to look in a much more master planning way at how Stamford could be delivered. So you can see the sheer scale and size of potential development on the horizon for Stamford. It is quite significant. So this is our land here. This is another landowner here who we're working closely with, and then there's another landowner here. We're also working with these landowners here, and traffic is absolutely critical to go here. So you can see that a potential new link road, and every time I show this slide locally, I wince because everyone thinks that's what we're going to do, but this is a guide, it's an idea, it's not a bypass. I get accused of putting a bypass in all the time. Traffic is changing. I don't know how many of you have opinions on traffic, but movement as a service is a fascinating debate. Electric cars, Tesla's electric lorry. I mean, you know, where do we go on traffic? What will it be in 20 years' time? Totally different to what it is today, I imagine. The biggest problem in early 1900s London was what? Anyone? Horse poo. Yeah. Now, it's congestion. So it's a changing world, and it's rapidly changing. I reckon we used to be about 20 to 25 years behind London on trends and everything else. I think that's shortening all the time. We're beginning to see people not owning cars in Stamford as well, and just using other forms of transport and hiring in, which I think is quite common in London. So it's about creating a sense of place. It's about creating market squares with parking in sensible places so that you don't ignore it. It's about, I'm not quite sure what this is, I think it's an attempt of the Louvre sort of style thing. I have had to rein our architect back a tiny bit on lots of things. But it is about creating space for people to move around in. It's about creating different sizes, flats in here, houses everywhere, but offices also around the back, creating a place for people to live and work. If you can stop people getting in their car, even 10, 15%, then you ease that traffic immediately. So if you give them something to go to on site rather than get in their car, then I think that's a good thing. Importantly to us, Burghley Horse Trials, changing demographic of people. It's very interesting to see how that's evolving. Visitor engagement is key. We've all got phones. We all use different social media interactions. Our sponsors require different things. Gone are the days they want lots of signs around the outside. They all want data. They all want to know what's going on where. How we use it, what we do with it, how we collect it is also changing with the data protection rules coming into force next year. Huge impact on lots of different things. Over 50 years for Burghley Horse Trials in the same location. Quite amazing background and backdrop of the house, but also changing rapidly as the Olympics evolve effectively. The modern equestrianism within the Olympics could have quite a large impact on horse trials. I could probably do well, I couldn't do a talk, but our event director could do a huge talk on horse trials. I could probably do one from another side of it, and I'm very happy to answer questions on it. I don't want to talk about it hugely. But actually what horse trials does is just show you the sheer scale. So that this year, 166,000 people came to Burghley Park over 4 days. The Saturday, the biggest day by far, and they pile in. This is a shopping experience. Sounds and looks like absolute hell on earth to me. Quite like Amazon, worryingly. But also you can see how a historic heritage asset is used. It's a one-way circulation system, this now. A couple of years, well, 5 years ago, that was going both ways. Now it's a one-way system. That means we have to go through our lake, Capability Brown Lake. How do we do it? I don't like putting stone in to make a dry footing. I want that gone, and horse trials have a mandate from me that that has to be gone, so we need to bridge it. So who makes bridges big enough to span our lake? How much are they, and how do we move the general public around? Because the one thing that the public will not do is get their feet wet. Even though they're wearing wellies, those wellies have cost them a lot of money, they're not going to get them wet. Defeats the object, but there we go. But it also shows just how many people, not only horse trials, but the estate engage with. Now these are just a few of our key stakeholders, you have to, my PA Steph, who is amazing at presentations, to thank for this one. I put May firmly at the middle because she, Sean and her team have been doing a fantastic project for us on heritage and sport, really working and looking at how we A, engage with the public, but also B, how our event evolves and how it can evolve within a listed heritage landscape. What are the threats? What are the opportunities going forward with that? And it has been a very interesting process, I think, for all of us at Burghley to step out of our comfort zone and really look at it in a different way. Not only from our heritage aspect, our horse trials team, our business side, but also the house, and how that engages with all of these different things. And I could have drawn lots and lots and lots of more arrows on there, but you can just see a tiny snapshot of what engaging with external stakeholders involves. So, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous. The rat race. Has anyone done a mud run? Good? Okay. I think if we could have a few more hands here next year. Burghley's core demographic. Remember that picture I put up at the beginning of a couple of pensioners sitting on a bench? Horse trials visitors. Wonderful. But there are a certain type of demographic that come to our events. So we needed to get into the younger audience, a different type of audience, a different demographic, an AB plus income bracket, 25 to 45-year-olds, good income streams. Why did we do it? We wanted to pull them into Burghley, to make them aware of who we are and what we are, and that we're not just a stuffy old country house. So we came up with a slightly different marketing campaign for it. And for all of you in the room who think that I'm sexist, I'm not. Both of them were made to get very muddy, and these were both their marketing assistants who came up with this idea to approach a different audience. And the first year we did it, we had 3,000 people. And last year, the fourth year of doing it, we had over 7,000 people doing it. It takes place over 13 or 20 miles. And there's over 200 obstacles involved. And it crosses the entire estate. We have an underpass and an overpass on the A1. And it has, from day one, been a wonderful event for us. It's got a lovely feel to it. People come from all over the place. We set everyone off in 15-minute intervals. They're called waves. Every 15 minutes, there's about 300 people. And we now have a Dutch wave. They're all dressed in orange. Because we had a team once who came, and then they've asked their friends and asked their friends. And it's just got a great sort of feel. I also worry that our park will look like this sometimes when it's been raining and everything else. But we also give them an evening concert, and we generally have a good band and a DJ, and they rock out the night. They also try and break a world record every year. So last year was the largest amount of people in a three-legged race. The year before was the most amount of people running 1 kilometre in their underpants. So they're not particularly highbrow in the event space. But it has been a fascinating learning curve for us, because horse trials is very different. Horse trials, I check our car parks up very early in the morning. The day after Saturday, 100,000 people through. The car parks have very little litter in them. You know, people take their litter home or they put it in a bin. After rat race, there are nice little piles of rubbish. They're not strewn everywhere. They've left them in piles at the back of their car or where they've taken off their muddy clothes and their trainers. But it is someone else's job to throw it away. They've paid an entry fee. It is someone else's job to do it. Whereas horse trials, they've paid an entry fee as well. It's just a different demographic. You take your litter home. It's a fascinating difference in all of them. But facilities management, people who run 20 miles, we've used showers, loos, we've got lots of drainage underground, we've got lots of water pipes underground, but they really do rehydrate with beer. And you can't have enough loos for them, and you can't have enough showers because they're filthy, but also you can't have enough food for them. So you provide all of this, and then they party, and then they go home. But if some of them come back to Burghley with their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their parents, their children, that's what we want. They've experienced us, they've stood there, they've seen the magnificence of Burghley House, and they think, ooh, I live in Nottingham, I've never been here before, I'll come back with my girlfriend next week. Or they come and get married with us, or they come on one of our spooky tours around the house, which we do on Halloween, which are terrifying, but also really good. But it's also taught us a lot. The first year we had it, everyone got off a bus wearing wellies, and I thought, oh, we've created Glastonbury, it's going to be a nightmare. But actually they were very responsible in that terms because they didn't want to make their campsite muddy. They were happy to get muddy outside of it. And so it has been a really interesting thing. And just to put my point on the beer, 7,000 people, last year, Saturday night, over 40,000 pints of beer. It's not pretty in the morning. So why do we do all that we do? Well, it brings us back to the park and the house. And you wonder why I've got sheep showing. It is a fundamental question that we are grappling with at the moment. I've talked about some fairly glamorous projects, multi-million-pound expenditures, lots of exciting projects on the horizon. But fundamentally, we need to look after the house and the park. It's what we're about. I'm the engine house that provides that to keep it going. And our grazier of nearly 30 years handed us notice the other day that he's finishing in March. So I have a grazed landscape of nearly 300 odd years, and I have Brexit looming on the horizon, and no farmer wishing to spec up 2,000 sheep to graze our park. Sheep are at about £135 a head, so that puts a quantum on the amount. With Brexit looming, there's no one out there who's going to take that risk and graze our park, yet it needs to be a grazed landscape. Or should it be a mown landscape? Should I change it after 300 years because a man on a tractor can do it, and I can take out all the fencing and just mow everywhere? Should we look at extending the deer herd through the other part of the park? The answer to that is firmly no, because it costs £800,000 as opposed to a couple of £100,000 to employ our own shepherd and sheep. But then, how do we skill up that level through our teams? So, other things going on: Lion Bridge, very capability brown, a meandering river through the park. The Lion Bridge is beautiful, but the clay line is also drying out. About 40 years ago, they put tarmac over the top, which sealed the clay, stopped it getting wet. It's now dried out, you can see, all the way down, and we've now got to repuddle the Lion Bridge. Anyone know how to repuddle? Me neither. Actually, we do now, because I gave a talk like this, and a fabulous lady who is head of Oriental Sciences in London, I think it's King's, or was it UCL, one of the two, said, oh, that's called hang-do. It's how they built the Great Wall of China. So we now know that you do it layer by layer of clay, and it's pretty much get your shoes and socks off and go through and mulch it down and get on with it. So that's next year. And it'll be a staff outing, and there'll be a hog roast at the end of the day. They don't know that yet. Sorry, I rushed through this one. Bottle lodges built to celebrate the Earl's elevation to Marquis in the early 1800s. We've just finished a £40,000 repair on this monument in the middle, and quite remarkable. Both of these are actually lived in as well. So our external boundary wall, we have about 14 miles of this, and this wall here has degraded to the point that it's obviously the stone face is coming off. That's for a very simple reason. Two simple reasons. The wrong stone was used when they rebuilt parts of the boundary wall, and this. Because the councils have no money to clean out their drains, they block, they pool water, salt gets in them, splashes up on the face of the stone, breaks the front face off, another frost, more stone water, salt water, collapses. Okay, this is £1,000 a metre, this wall, to repair. And next year we take on 2 stonemasons and buy loads of stone in conjunction with Natural England, who have been fantastic to repair it. We have lots of other architectural monuments. We have pigeon lofts, dovecotes. This one holds about 600. And this is about 1.5 miles from the house, so a kitchen boy would have been sent out here to collect them all at some stage. And then finally, a random thing, last slide for you to stop. This happened, actually the video has been released today. Completely different for Burghley, all again about a new demographic, a new visitor audience. We have a wonderfully crazy inventor in Stanford called Colin Furze, and if you Google his YouTube channel, he has over 6 million followers. He's just been sponsored by eBay. He's built this TIE fighter from Star Wars out of everything bought on eBay. He's built it in the Burghley Park, and the video went live today. I don't know how many thousands of hits it had. He put a teaser out on Tuesday and had 300,000 hits by today, and he normally gets around 35 to 50 million hits by the time the film goes live in about 3 weeks. So a huge audience for us. The house is in front of this, and this will also be going into a sculpture garden that we have around the house next year. In Other Worlds, it's called our theme for next year. So it's completely random, completely different, but also shows how a landed estate moves all the way through those generations and looks at the next 500 years while looking after its portfolio. So there you go. I've rambled and rattled through that, May, and you can ask me any questions you like.
Thank you very much, David. Obviously, time for questions. And if you could say your name and where you're from, that would help David understand where your question is coming from. Who's going first?
Excellent.
Oh, hands in the air.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Hi, my name's Sophie Hetherington. I'm a heritage consultant at Turley.
Right.
I was just wondering, you mentioned obviously the problem of the grazier
Mm-hmm.
leaving. Do you use...
Oh, you found it? Good. Thanks, Jason.
Have you used historic gardening techniques in, say, the walled garden and things, or have you modernised the practices in the grounds overall?
For the gardens themselves, I think embarrassingly, but the one thing that Burghley lacks as a great house is a great garden. Certainly around the house. It's very much a landscape garden. There's brown influences all over it. So not a huge amount of actual digging and disturbance has taken place, really, over the centuries. And actually it's something that we are looking at for our quincentenary in 2020, is a huge new garden. There was a wonderful reflecting pool out in the front of Burghley House about 300 years ago that Brown swept away. And the reflection of that house in that pool was amazing. So we're looking at possible restoration of that, and involving May and some stuff on that as well. In the wall garden, and not a huge amount is known, quite frankly, about the historical stuff underground. I'm sure we could do a huge amount. It's all a matter of availability of resource, really, and it hasn't been a priority for us, sadly. Yeah, no problem.
Solutions within reach. I suppose a couple of questions. The costs that and the price that you've been quoting seem to be remarkably well honed.
Mm-hmm.
Raise the question: how have you managed to do it so finely and with the permissions of all the planning authorities? I suppose that's one question. And the other one is Burghley seems to be quite a few paces ahead of what other landed estates are doing. Is that fair?
I'll take that as a compliment, thank you. I told you the figures we'd spent. I didn't tell you the budget to begin with. So we very much find, so the dairy, for example, we were 40 grand over budget. The hotel that I talked about, one of the hotels that I talked about at the beginning, when I arrived, we took one of those back and it was £600,000 over budget. When you open up these historic buildings and you find huge problems behind walls, behind doors, behind ceilings, under roofs. You can set budgets very early, and actually I've learned a monstrous amount from all of that. Our contingencies are huge within our budgets. So we nail down very hard on our expenditure. You know, the house, our quinquennial survey, you know, that's done every 5 years, obviously. But that is adhered to, it's stuck to, we're pricing that, we're trying to operate 3 years ahead, so we know what works are coming. We have in-house teams, we have external contractors. Where I think we need to get even more detailed is on more detailed specifications, so we really can try and nail down the overages that are coming our way, because there are so many projects that we want to do, but also we've picked some of the low-hanging fruit, but not all of it, and I think some more difficult ones are coming. In answer to your part about whether we're further ahead on some things, I think we are on some things, and I think we're further behind on others. But we are very lucky as a charitable trust that we can be quite punchy on some of the things we do because of our charitable status. But that said, and we can roll sort of funds without inheritance tax and without capital gains tax into projects, and we can keep. So the sales of that football club land, for example, I sold for millions, but we didn't pay 28 or 40% on it in losses. We rolled that in. But that's all the fact that we have to spend it on chimneys. You know, each chimney on that house costs £50,000 a year to do. It's a bit like the Forth Road Bridge. We've nearly finished them. You take them down, you reinforce them with steel rods, stonemason's time. It's huge, the expense. So, yeah, we sit on costs all the time. Yeah.
Hey, my name's Nicola Duncan-Finn. I'm a heritage consultant at UCL.
Yep.
I'm interested, you kind of answered in a way actually, because you were talking about quinquennial surveys
Yep.
and wider things, but the variety of your portfolio obviously is going to be very much reliant upon regular maintenance and actually looking at preventive maintenance
Yep.
strategies, embodying those within general practice. With your quinquennial, obviously you have a full quinquennial, you've got a full team
Yep.
dealing with the house. How well does that extend to the larger stock? Because obviously that's
Yeah.
incrementally
Yeah.
risky, particularly because you have a variation in uptake and
Yeah.
residency.
So, yeah, a really, really good question, something we're grappling with. Yeah, absolutely, something we're grappling with at the moment. So the house has had all our resource focused on it for 50 years.
Yeah.
I arrived and was given not a completely blank piece of paper on the estate side, but a relatively blank piece to get it going, to get that tanker turned, create new income streams. And one of the things from that is a new role that we've just created, Head of Building Services, to roll out much more of a strategic view of our property portfolio across the board. You know, what do our houses need? You know, EPCs, what do we need to bring them all up to standard? Which ones are failing, which ones aren't? Well, when you've got hundreds of resis, houses and units, you know, that in itself is a task. But we've also let ourselves down in the past. So the house is completely covered by the quinquennial, and we spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on that every year. And we're very up to speed with that. But when you look at our external decks across our residential portfolio, we just don't hit it as hard because we haven't skilled up the labour force to do it, and we haven't, you know, done it that way. And there's so much more that we could be doing. But also the worry with that is that you then scare yourself silly with the liability out there of what you need to do. But also, so it is a balance of liability versus. It is, yeah, yeah.
Doing some work with historic royal palaces on some of our training and looking at the differentiation of risk in different levels. And I just
Yeah.
think it'd be interesting to see how that's being approached.
Someone ultimately needs to make the decision on those things that are coming down the pipe with, you know, roof repairs, chimney repairs, window repairs across the entire estate, and who's going to prioritise those ones and which one's done first. Also, it's back to that brand enhancement, reputation that I put on as a priority. When I arrived at Burghley, there were 25 houses vacant out of our stock, mid-credit crunch, because we would sit there and say, this house is worth £695 a month, and you'll pay it. If you don't like it, we're Burghley, we'll wait. Hang on a sec, it's vacant for a year. Why don't you take £650 that they offered? You can't behave like that as a landlord anymore. These are clients, they're customers, and you must service them. But also, if you spend 10 painful years getting your stock in order, then it's a lot easier in the future, I think, to know what else you can do, because you've quantified the liability.
I'm Miles O'Brien. I'm a MSc Urban Regeneration student. I wondered, who are you answerable to? Is it there's a family that owns the house, or is it now just completely owned by the charity?
It's owned by the charitable trust. So the Burghley House Preservation Trust is a charity. There is a family member living in the house. There are some private apartments held within there. And Miranda Rock is the granddaughter of the Marquis. She's the house director. I'm classed the estates director. I'm responsible to the chairman of our trustees of the Burghley House Preservation Trust board. And there is a board of trustees, men and women who are experts in their field, and they vary from commercial property people to lawyers to furniture to architects to historians to other landed estate owners. And so we pull on their experience and their skill. I report to them 3 times a year, a bit like a company. I report up to the chairman. So, in the back in the red.
Yeah, I just want to see where the hands are. Yes, you'll be next, okay? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lucy Robinson. I'm from the Heritage Shuttle Fund. I was wondering, when you're looking at your portfolio of different business ventures and income between generations, how do you approach business planning? Do you do individual plans for each sort of operation or
Yep.
venture? And does the same team do it, or how does that work?
Let me put up a slide so that we can talk about that. Because it's a really interesting point. And there we go. So, Burghley House here. So, for example, golf course here, hotels and pubs. This doesn't show our resi portfolio in here either. A lot of stuff owned here. So this airfield, this Ministry of Defence base, for example, and some more in there. But when we look at businesses, we look at how they are Burghley led, how we can work together with them, how we work as a group. We're not technically a group, if that makes sense, because we are a parent company, Burghley House Preservation Trust. But as a charity, that charity can't trade, because that's Charity Commissioners law. So we create listed companies underneath. We have Burghley Horse Trials Limited, Burghley Estate Farms Limited, Burghley Estate Leisure Limited, and Burghley Enterprises. Now, if we were looking at a new business, it doesn't necessarily need to make us a huge amount of money, but it's how it can work with everything else that we're doing that is important to us. But it's also important that it is delivered at a very high quality level, because everything we're trying to do is to be the best at what we do and to preserve the best Elizabethan mansion house in the country. And so if you're going to do it properly. Don't skimp on things, but look very much at the detail to begin with, is how we approach all of that. And we're looking at probably 2 or 3 different things. And when I say that, we've talked about the wall garden, okay? And the wall garden is here, okay? And you've got Burghley House there. But if this is the only part of the park in here, up to the lake, along there, that bottom section of the park is open to the public every day. But if we were to change that and open up this wider part of the park, what could we add in? How could we monetize the opportunities at the wall garden? What would we do with them? What would it cost us to do it? Does it add value to our product? Does it add value to the experience? Is it cheapening it? All of those different factors go towards everything. And so I have big heads of department underneath me that they look at all that all the time.
Well, that was really interesting. Thank you so much. My name is Jeffrey Reed, and I'm with the International National Trust. I have two questions. What was the inspiration that enabled Burghley House to continue? Because there must be, there are other similar properties which have declined over the years, but there must have been somebody inspirational within the family or something which actually...
In the last 100 years or the last... Over the period, over the last 500 years, or?
Well, I think even over the pressure must have been over the last 100 years.
Yeah, so I think David Exeter, the 6th Marquis, he was chairman of the 1948 Olympics, for example. He was, a 400-metre hurdler, champion, gold, silver. He was, and also a lovely man, apparently. And he was instrumental in protecting the house, he and his wife. But actually, back in the days, this agricultural land was the one that gave the income. And if you looked back over time, agricultural land was where your income came from. Now, it's less than 10% of our income, agricultural land. But land is the bedrock of everything we do, because you can build on it, you can develop it, you can, get water, energy, everything out of land. Whereas if you built a house, you can sell the house, but then your money's gone, and families lose the family silver very quickly. And what they had was huge. It's a matter of scale and proportion as well, probably. So what has survived is still quite large, but what they had was absolutely scary. And enormous, and large landed estates were decimated by death duties. Lady Victoria Lethem was absolutely instrumental in working with English Heritage, Heritage England, whatever their incarnation was called, in the 70s and 80s, on protecting the house, the lead, the chimneys, the stonework, grants, on all of that. And that has evolved over time. But the landed part was ignored. But luckily, it was ignored, and I've had a great time of working that blank canvas. But there's still a huge amount to go.
Well, my other question was, what impact does the common agricultural policy, all the changes are they likely to make on you? I'm surprised that land is only 10% of your total revenue. I would have thought it's a very big part of it.
It's a huge part of our estate. But if you look at income streams, not of revenue, no. But it's still a vital, 10% of something is still, depends what your 100% is, isn't it? If you, exactly. But if it, how do you explain this? So every single part, every different stream of our income is important to us. It's the old adage of look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. If you look after every part, which takes an enormous amount of work. And that's why, we're now over 100 staff. Legislation and all of that changes. Back to your question of common agricultural policy, I imagine there will be quite a lot of fallout from old-style tenants who can't cope without subsidies, because their whole income relies on that subsidy payment, and that is likely to fall. And how are farmers going to compete against nurses and fire teams and health when they're bidding for money in the future? I mean, and you can see why. But that means that the good farmers will come up again, and farming will increase. There's an argument to say that there's more opportunity than there are threats, and I think you should always look at the positives, but be minded to the negatives.
Thanks.
You spoke about your sorry, I'm Mark Kearney from UCL.
Right.
You spoke about your difficulty in finding staff for replacing people who've been there for 20, 30 years.
Yep.
Do you think the heritage profession is doing enough to supply you as an employer with that staff? And the second part of that question is, as an employer, looking at heritage in the broad sense of themes of how you deliver a project, are you getting enough value for money from heritage to warrant paying what you're paying for it? Or could you pay a little bit extra?
Right. Could we pay a little bit extra to look after it?
Well, could you pay the heritage industry a bit? Like, are we undervalued as an industry, is what I'm trying to ask. Compared to the other industries you employ to deliver your projects, and the value that heritage brings to delivering that project in the first place, is heritage undervalued compared to what you're paying the other industries?
Yes. How many people have worked on a house like that? No hands. One. Okay. I hadn't worked on a house like that until I got to Burghley, but I got lots of different experience all the time. And the other day I had a first experience. We've got some metal gates built by the Marquis, or commissioned by the Marquis on the Bottle Lodges when he became a Marquis from an Earl. Made these metal gates. They haven't been taken off for near 200 years. I had to go and see the blacksmith who's repairing them. What do I know about 200-year-old cast iron gates? Absolutely nothing, other than the common sense and the information that I have gathered over heritage over my career. We've just employed a head of building services. We've been very lucky to find one who's got some heritage experience. But we were very careful to interview a huge range of people, because you simply don't find people who've done something like that. It is a matter of building all of that. It shouldn't be an exclusion to working on a house like that. And I think it takes someone to be slightly open-minded, bigger-minded, to say, you've got that bit of experience, you've got that bit, so if we combine you two together, we'll get what we need. And actually it's finding those now that's the problem. You know, we've just had a guy working on the lead. I was saying to May earlier, we just had a guy working on the lead on the roof, who I know is doing some stuff with Historic England and everything else. We were very worried about some brown rusting spots, and our house architect, who's from Cambridge, who has a huge amount of experience, who we're hoping doesn't retire for quite some time. You know, where do we find a new house architect, for example, to do our quinquennial works, who has the experience of everything there to give us that information? But the whole lead problem, you know, this rusting, this brown rusting stuff that we've got, it's only occurred in the last 10 years, but it's European and English wide, and actually it's more prevalent in the countryside than it is in the cities. And actually it's because we've got too much clean air, because there aren't the gases coming out of power stations to I believe put sulfuric acid into the air, to the precipitation, to clean off the lead as it comes off. So there was me thinking, oh my goodness, it's all going to fall apart and it's going to cost me millions to redo the lead. No, it's fine. But it took me a while to find the person to do it. Lion Bridge, repuddling. So I do talks like this so that people ask me questions, I talk about stuff, they tell me stuff, and then gives me an in and an angle.
I think it
Could you introduce yourself, please?
sorry, Jennifer White from Historic England. I wondered if you'd share with us your own career path. You've got a really complex job.
My own career path. I grew up on a farm. I ran, and then I did agricultural business management at university. And then I did land economy after that. I then ran a couple of businesses for my father, who's a bit of an entrepreneur, for about 18 months. And then I went to work at Goodwood, where I'd done some work experience in the holidays and slept on a stable floor, literally, because that was the cheapest accommodation there was available. But I wanted to work on a large landed estate. I never wanted to be a farmer, per se, although I had a basic agricultural degree. I loved business, was going to study history at university, so I love understanding things. I then, so I did Goodwood. I then was a partner in a firm called Clutton's, property consultants. I then did the Arundel Castle estate for a tiny bit, and then went independent with them for that. And then I did, so whilst I was Clutton's, I did sort of institutional work and other client work as well. And then I moved to Burghley about 7 years ago. Nearly 8 years ago, gosh. That's terrifying. 8 years ago. But actually, so my job now, so you ask about this, but I think I don't want to get stuck in the historic heritage landscape. I think it's absolutely vital that these houses have a broad spectrum approach to business, to life, to engagement. I'm a governor at a further education college. So the one that we worked with on the football club then asked me to be their governor. I'm now their chair of finance and resources. That's a £17 million turnover business. I'm a governor at a local school. I sit on lots of other things locally. I engage with lots of people all the time. I don't do any property management anymore. I'm purely business and strategy, really, and stakeholder engagement, and coming up with crazy ideas for the estate, because that's what they used to do. You know, why did William Cecil build that house? He was crazy enough to think, you know, thy wit and my money have made thee rich, Burghley, is what Elizabeth said. You know, your brains have got you there, you've made the money, and he went and built something like that. Why on earth would you build something like that? 1572, it's massive. It must have just drained all his resources, but it was about a show of power. But now it is not a matter of showing power, it's a matter of working with everyone. And that in itself is complex, and that teaches you a huge amount if you're willing to engage with people, which I think you have to be.
Shall we draw it to a close on that fantastic comment? And thank you, David,
That's
very
all right.
much.